Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kendrick, and let's give you a little bit of an update from my last podcast. At the beginning, I talked a bit about my throat, and this weird sensation I've been having going on in my throat for about the last month and a half or so. On top of that, for the last few months, I would say probably going on 4 months, my nose has been draining at a ridiculous rate, and I really don't know why. And my ears also sound like firecrackers. It's very, very strange. I did speak to a doctor on Monday, and basically she told me she thinks it sounds like allergies, so she has me taking a allergy pill thing, and she wants me on it for about a week or 2 weeks or so, and to essentially call back. If it works, then cool. If it doesn't work, then I will actually go into the doctor, and they will apparently put a camera down my throat and look and see if they can see anything, see any marking, anything that could possibly tell them what is actually wrong with me. So I'm hoping that goes well. But anyways, we got some stuff to talk about here. We got to talk about Washington's name change. It is official. Washington D.C.'s football team will no longer be a racial slur, so that's exciting. We're going to talk about that a bit. I have my way too early Super Bowl prediction. I'm going to take a team out of the AFC and a team out of the NFC. I haven't decided on whether or not I'm going to predict who I think will win the matchup, but I'm going to predict the two teams, give my reasons why and everything. We're going to move into Dak and the Cowboys regarding his deal, or I guess you could say his lack of a deal, and then stay tuned, because we're going to get into sorry about that. We're going to get into my top 10 quarterbacks that I would take right now moving forward if I was going to start my own franchise. So we're going to exclude guys like Tom Brady, exclude guys like Aaron Rodgers, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees, some of these older guys. Alright, this is not my top 10 quarterbacks in the league right now, because of course in that case I have to include guys like Drew Brees, I have to include guys like Tom Brady, but that is not how I'm doing this. I'm going based off of guys who I could take moving forward for like the next 10 years. The guys I want to be the face of my franchise moving forward for the next 15, 10 years or so. So stay tuned for that. Final topic of the day. Anyways, change is something that some people really struggle with. Now, if you grew up in a lot of chaos, if you grew up with a lot of change, a lot of moving parts, no real consistency, if your life was consistently inconsistent, then the older you get, once you start moving into your adult life, once you start moving into having to worry about things like jobs and paying taxes and paying bills and everything, and getting fired from a job, looking for a job, getting hired, relationships, all that stuff, you can handle it a lot better because you grew up in it. You're just kind of used to it. That's actually, if anything, more of your normal. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you like it. It doesn't necessarily mean that's how you prefer to live, but it means that when the water gets bumpy, when you go off road a bit, when your life takes a bit of a turn, maybe for the worst, maybe just in a different path than you expected, you know how to weather the storm a bit better. My mother, growing up, was in a lot of chaos. Gonna be completely honest. She was surrounded by a lot of chaos. Moving all over the place, not the greatest home life. She never really stayed in the same school district. never stayed in the same house for too long. That just wasn't how my mom got to grow up. And I don't necessarily know if she would look at it as a blessing or a curse. I haven't asked her that question. But what I do know that it did for my mom is that the older she got, once she eventually had a kid, once she had me, once she had to deal with looking for relationships, for jobs, multiple jobs at the time, she was able to weather the storm a bit better than some other people who may have grown up in a more idealistic household, because she had already dealt with it before. Maybe not to the extent, but just as you get older, though the problems change. As a child, your problems are different. As a teenager, your problems are different than as if you were an adult. Though they change a bit, the pressure is pressure. Chaos is chaos. And though it might feel a bit different, there is a familiarity to it. So my mom just knew how to handle it better. And, for me growing up, I didn't necessarily have that kind of chaos. My mom made sure that our home life stayed relatively good. We made sure to stay in the same kind of area. Oh, she made sure to keep me in the same kind of area, make sure I could have the same friends, make sure I could, stay in the same school district, everything. So, really, I grew up with I grew up with a less chaotic kind of household. So for me, I wouldn't necessarily adapt to chaos and change the way that my mom would. I think I do adapt to it well, but I do not adapt to it nearly as well as she. So, Washington, their football team, went ahead and released a statement on Monday saying that they are officially retiring their name and their logo. So their name, that racial slur against Native Americans, will be gone, and their logo, which is just basically the head of a Native American, that will also be gone. I haven't seen any timetable on when exactly they plan to change their name, but I would have to assume it's gonna be before the season starts. If you're already retiring it now, that means they've got some ideas. I've heard the Washington Warriors are an idea. Some people have said that maybe they could try and buy out the Washington Generals. I just don't think that's going to happen. But I will tell you right now, this was very shocking. It was very shocking to see how fast this happened. But I think it also just goes to show that when big businesses want change to come, when corporations want change to come, they'll make it happen. And even though I don't think that Dan Snyder wants this change to come, he's doing it because of the pressure from his sponsors. FedEx has said that they would remove their name from the stadium. All these sponsors were planning on pulling out. It would be a huge loss of money to him, and we all know billionaires love their money. Even though I don't think this is change he necessarily wants, you have that combined with the public outcry, with movements like Black Lives Matter going on, bringing attention to the injustices that people of color, not just black people, but people of color face on a daily basis. The climate was just not this was not the time for Dan Snyder to hold the same opinion he had back in 2013, in which he said, "We'll never change the name. It's that simple. Never. You can use caps." Meaning you can go ahead and all cap that never, alright? That's capital N, capital E, capital V, capital E, capital R. Never. And now with 2020, so 7 years later, he is going to change it. Again, I don't think he's doing it out of the kindness of his heart. I think he's been forced into it. But it's change that should be welcomed. Because the thing is, when change comes, the thing you always hope for is that you change for the better. Remember, we as people, we are changing every single day. And our paths are constantly changing. The people we surround ourselves they're constantly changing. The thing that you hope for is that the change is good. This isn't the first time that the NFL has made a change that has caused an outcry, though, from people. This isn't the first time the NFL has made a change that made one half of the U.S. population go, "That's great," and the other half go, "That is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life." Let me give you guys an example. Hey, do you guys remember when the NFL decided that you should be able to challenge pass interference. Man, wasn't that a fun season? I think 2 coaches won pass interference challenges the whole year. It was challenged over 20 times, I believe, and 2 coaches won. The referees themselves basically boycotted the rule. The referees themselves didn't want to call it. They didn't want to change it. They just thought it was ridiculous. And the reason why this rule got put into place was because of why? Because New Orleans fans, the Saints fan base, was basically up in arms, just crying to the NFL, trying to make petitions, I think there was even a threat of a lawsuit against the NFL. I mean, it was ridiculous. And the whole reason was because there was one of the most egregious pass interference calls I have ever seen in the Rams-Saints title game, in which the Saints got absolutely screwed. That is not up for debate. The Saints were absolutely screwed. Who was it? I think it was Tommy Lee, who ended up getting hit. I think there's another addition to his name, but he got hit by Roby Coleman before the ball even got to him. I watched it in real time. It looked like pass interference. I was expecting a flag to get thrown. Not a single flag got thrown. And from that point on, Saints fans have never forgiven the NFL. They feel like the NFL has completely screwed them out of getting a Super Bowl. Because this is Drew Brees' last year, and I haven't heard many people thinking the Saints are necessarily Super Bowl favorites. But the NFL decided to implement this rule. They wanted to test it out for a season. It was rushed. There were so many flaws with the rule. It just wasn't good. And the result of it just kind of resulted in, it just caused more stoppage of the game. The referee would a coach would challenge it. It would kind of look like pass interference, but the referees wouldn't change anything. Change happens all the time. The helmets in the NFL, those change. There are players in the NFL who do not like the fact that a helmet that they maybe have grown accustomed to, that they've grown used to using, is all of a sudden no longer allowed. Antonio Brown, he hated the fact that his helmet, his favorite helmet, was no longer allowed. And he literally attempted to boycott going to practice and everything because he couldn't use his favorite helmet. And then other rules have changed too, right? You can't hit the quarterback below the knee anymore because of what happened to Tom Brady. You look at the catch rule, that got changed because for so many years people have been trying to figure out what the hell is a catch. Change just happens. And the thing that you always hope is that it's going for the better. You hope that it's not going you hope that we're not going backwards. You hope that we're changing to go forward. And that's what I think Washington's doing. They have acknowledged their name. Well, not Washington themselves, right? They've kind of been forced into acknowledging it. But their name is a racial slur against Native Americans. And whether or not you think of Native Americans in that way, whether or not you ever would even think to associate that name with them, it doesn't matter. It's not about you. It is about the Native Americans who have come out and who have said, yes, this is offensive. And now there are those Native Americans who have come out as well and who have said they don't mind. You know, that the name is not really a huge deal to them. But then there's those who say it is. So, I mean, yes, of course it's divided. But the point is, there is a group of people who find the thing offensive. It's history. The history to the name is what it is. You cannot change it. Alright, in old Cowboys and Indians movies, they're calling them those damn dirty Redskins. I mean, they're not calling them homie, alright? That's not a term of endearment. So, I think it's a good thing. I applaud Washington on moving to change their name. I applaud them on this happening so quickly, and I am very interested to see what name they end up picking. excuse me, whether it be the Warriors or whether or not they change it to something else that we haven't even heard about yet, who knows? But whether it be what's going on with Washington or whether it be that pass interference rule that absolutely failed, or the helmet rules, or the tuck rules, or the catch rules, or where you can hit the quarterback, all of these rules were put in place for one reason. All of these changes were put forth to be made for one reason, and that was to make the game, to make the atmosphere, to make the product better. They were put in place to be more progressive, to move forward rather than take a step backwards. Right? Now, if Washington all of a sudden came out and said that they are changing their names instead to the Washington, and I don't know, and let's just say they picked a tribe, right? Let's say they picked a tribe and they didn't communicate with the tribe at all. They just said, we're just going to take your name, and they're going to change their logo to like whatever that tribe's symbol is. Then they have changed for the worse, right? They've changed to kind of stand pat. If anything, they doubled down, they tripled down on having, for whatever reason, having a Native American symbol and everything be their logo and be their name. I don't think they're going to do that. I am honestly not sure. I'm not Dan Snyder. I am not the people on this panel. I have no clue what they're going to do, but change is inevitable. And to anyone who wants to be a part of the boycott crowd, who wants to say they're going to boycott Washington, they're going to boycott the NFL because they're making them change the name, whatever it might be, just know that you are in the minority. I will still be watching football. I will be paying close attention. I'm going to watch this team. Hell, I might even start to root for this team at times. Because, Lord, every single game I ever saw them in, I would always say, like, I hope that they lose. Because I figured that was probably like the only way that the team would ever even think about rebranding itself, would be if this team was to just stink, would be to stink up the joint year in and year out. It is the only way that this team would even remotely think about changing the name, would be if they were going to do a complete overhaul. If they became so inept that they were just like, we need to completely change our image, and then maybe they change their name. I might actually now root for that team, now that their name isn't what it is. Again, I'm not with this boycott crowd. I don't think it's a gigantic deal. I understand people's feelings if they are against the name change. I understand your feelings. And I don't think that they're not valid. For some of these people who have grown up rooting for this team all their life, they've only known this name. And it's now just disappearing. But as I've said before, other teams in history have changed their names. The Titans were not always the Titans. The Hornets were not always the Hornets. Teams, they move states. Teams, they change names. Sometimes a team even leaves the country. The Grizzlies, right? The Grizzlies, they were not always in Memphis. They used to be up in Canada, in Vancouver, I believe. So, change is a part of our life, and you just gotta get on the boat. This change is for the better. I welcome it. I am excited to see how this franchise does moving forward. Anyways, coming up next, my way too early Super Bowl prediction. We haven't even had a preseason game. Not all the players have been signed yet that are going to be signed. There's still free agents. But I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction right now. And I want to see how accurate it is to when this season starts. That up next.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about Washington and the fact that they are officially retiring their name as well as their logo and how it is a change that they're trying to make for the better and that it is something that should be welcomed because of the fact that they are trying to do it for the better. They're trying to be on the right side of history. They've been on the wrong side of history for a long time. And even though Dan Snyder will probably forever be on the wrong side of history because he had to be forced into this, it is still change that I and many, many others do welcome. Anyways, let's go ahead and let's do this. My way too early Super Bowl prediction. So, I've gone through all the teams, and I've said before in previous podcasts, I have said that I believe that the teams going into the season that are going to have the biggest advantages are the teams in which they don't have a new head coach, they don't have a new quarterback, and they especially don't have two new guys together, right? If this is a head coach's first year and he's got a rookie quarterback, this is not going to go well. If you've got a team that has a first-year quarterback, maybe a second-year head coach, but either way it's a new head coach, I still don't think it's going to look that good. And then it's the same thing for a quarterback that's been there, the head coach is new, you gotta learn their verbiage, you gotta learn their system if they're not gonna build a system around you, whatever it might be, limited OTAs, limited training camp, limited preseason, it's just not gonna be pretty for these teams. I've said before, I think that the teams are gonna really look successful would be teams like Seattle, teams like the Niners, the Chiefs, the Ravens, some of these teams where they've been together, you could say the Packers, obviously Rodgers been in the system, the coach has been there for a year, they're still together, even though the pieces around might not be that great, I still think they have a chance to be more successful than, for example, the Bengals. I think the Bengals are going to really struggle this season. So looking at all the teams, looking at, the rosters, what players is that they kept? What players did they lose? How many other starters are returning? Is the coaching staff intact? All that stuff. This is what I've come down to. I think that this year's Super Bowl is going to come down between the Kansas City Chiefs. I do believe they are going to get back to the Super Bowl. And the New Orleans Saints. And I know that might sound a bit shocking, right? I just got done talking about how people, they kind of look at the Saints and some people think they are screwed out of getting a Super Bowl. This is Drew Brees' last year, and not many people are spending their time talking about them. They're talking more about Tampa Bay with their addition to Tom Brady, working with all those weapons. They're talking more about the Niners. Can they repeat? People are talking about the Packers. Can Aaron Rodgers muster this together? And I think that's a problem. I think that the Saints, if anything, are in the best position in their division. Let me go ahead and explain why. Tom Brady is new to Tampa Bay. Alright? He has never worked with Bruce Arians. I've said it before, quarterbacks in their first year with Bruce Arians typically lead the league in turnover-worthy plays. Tom Brady is older. That's undeniable. He's older. He is slower. He does not react the same anymore. He does not necessarily have the same arm. I refuse to believe that he has the same arm he has now as he had when he was in his mid-20s, early 30s. I just simply don't believe it. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe that's my bad. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. I just simply do not believe it. I can't believe that. But then you look at the other teams, the Panthers. Teddy Bridgewater and Matt Rule. Teddy's first year there. Matt Rule's first year there. They got to try and work together, having all the limited. It's just not going to happen. There's no way. And even though they got Teddy Bridgewater, I didn't think they were all of a sudden some playoff Super Bowl team. I kind of looked at it as, okay, I mean, they signed a solid quarterback. Not exactly a big arm, not too mobile, doesn't really push the ball down the field, but maybe they could do something if training camp was the same, but it's simply not. And then as for the Falcons, I think that they're just demoralized by what happened to them in the Super Bowl. They have never been the same, and I am not sure if they're ever going to. Though they stay competitive a lot. You know, like in every single game, they're pretty competitive. They've still got so much firepower on that offense. Their defense is kind of hit and miss. Some players keep getting hurt. But, you know, I mean, you look at all those teams and you look at the Saints. The Saints have stayed intact. Their offensive line, though it is getting younger, is still perceived as one of the best offensive lines in football. You've got now a true number 2 wide receiver to Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. Your tight end position, you still got Jared Cook. You still got that kid Hill as your backup tight end. And of course, Taysom Hill, he's lining up everywhere. Alvin Kamara is still there. And while he is looking to get paid, by all accounts, he's supposed to play this season. He's the only running back in NFL history to have 2,000 receiving yards and 2,000 rushing yards in his first 3 seasons, along with 3 Pro Bowls. Okay, Alvin Kamara is a beast. They got Latavius Murray to be his number 2 still. I'm excited to see this. And then you look at Drew Brees. There's been a lot of noise made about Drew Brees, in that he's slowing down, he doesn't have the same arm, and while I think that that's true, let me go ahead and just read you guys some stats here. Did you know his accurate pass rate in 2019 was number 1 in the NFL? 66%. Did you guys know his passing grade against zone coverage for the last 2 seasons, so from 2017 through 2019, is only second to Patrick Mahomes? He's the second highest graded QB in 1-score games since 2007. If you look at the highest graded quarterbacks on 3rd and 4th down from just this last season, Drew Brees was 3rd in the NFL. You know who was above him? And this is kind of surprising. It's Russell Wilson at number 1, of course, I could see that. And Kirk Cousins. The Kirk Cousins part is a bit shocking, but Drew Brees is not slowing down, people. While he doesn't have the same arm, I agree. His arm is not the same. Just like I don't believe that Tom Brady's arm is the same. But they have the 24th ranked schedule. They have the 4th best odds to win it all. This is Drew Brees' last year. His defense is still good. Not as good as it was a few seasons ago, where it was a top 10, top 5 defense. It has fallen off a bit since then, but it's still in the upper half. I think last year they were ranked 16, so just out of the upper half, but I do believe they will get better. I think there's a thing to say that these players are going to be really motivated to make the most of this year. Their offense was still elite last year, still one of the top scoring offenses, still one of the top offenses just in general last year. Sean Payton, he knows what's at stake here. He knows this is Drew Brees' last year. He knows what they gotta do. And I can't say, before I get into the Chiefs aspect of this conversation, I cannot say that teams like the Packers have failed with Aaron Rodgers, or that teams like the Seahawks so far have kind of failed with Russell Wilson, based off of how many Super Bowl championships they have, or you could say don't have. If Drew Brees doesn't at least get one more Super Bowl, if this season doesn't end with Drew Brees having a second Super Bowl, what a failure this has been. You have had Drew Brees for over 10 years. Together, Sean Payton and Drew Brees, they have the most 5,000-yard passing seasons. They have broken record after record together. All-time passing leader, all-time touchdown leader. You've had this guy on your team for over 10 years, and you have 1 Super Bowl trip and 1 Super Bowl championship. For about 3 straight years, you guys went 7-9. In Drew Brees' prime, by the way, you guys went 7-9 every single year because your defense was the worst in the league and couldn't get a single stop. You literally put Drew Brees out there to do a shootout week after week after week, and he carried your team to 7-9. He literally had to carry that sorry defense. You finally get this defense together, and you guys still haven't put it together. Right? The offensive line, still good. Receiving core, they now have a solid number 2 to Michael Thomas, who of course is still there. Their tight end position, Jared Cook, was great last year for them. Got hurt a bit, but still good. Taysom Hill is a monster everywhere he lines up. He is just a Swiss Army knife of a player. He's supposed to be the heir apparent to Drew Brees. I think the Saints can get this. I think a combination really of their schedule being so easy and Drew Brees being as motivated as ever to win this season, is basically the reason why I have them in over the Niners. The Niners have the 3rd or 4th ranked schedule in the league. I just think that might catch up to them. Though they were running over some teams, I just think that kind of schedule discrepancy, and the Saints played the Niners really tough, almost beat them. They were in a shootout together. I just think that the Saints got it. I think the Saints, they are my pick out of the NFC. Now, as for the AFC side of things, right? I got the Chiefs. Now, don't get me wrong. I actually had a bit of a toss-up here. I couldn't decide if I wanted to take the Chiefs or the Ravens. I'm not putting any other team in those two guys' class. The Ravens were a monster last year. They made some great additions. Lamar Jackson still seems motivated as ever to play. But my whole thing was, you don't have any playoff success. There's no playoff success with this team. Lamar Jackson hasn't won a playoff game. In fact, in his first 2 playoff games, he's stunk it up. His play significantly declines, at least in his first 2 times in the playoffs. And I think that's a problem. I don't think that's something that we can just ignore. So I go to the Chiefs, and even though there is, of course, the fear of a Super Bowl hangover, there is the fear that that Chris Jones could possibly not end up playing. Chris Jones got an extension. He got a 4-year extension worth $85 million, $60 million guaranteed. So, and I've said this before, and I do have to apologize. I didn't realize I was saying this wrong. I was consistently saying they're returning 30 of 32 starters, or 31 of 32 starters. That's my bad. They are returning 21 of 22 starters. Oh god, I hit my throat. I hate it so much. Sorry about that. But at the same time, the Chiefs, they have they have the best odds to win the Super Bowl. I think behind them, it's the Ravens, the Niners, and then the Saints. And I've given my reason as to why I don't think the Niners are going to come out of the NFC. I just think it's a combination of their schedule. Look, I think them losing Emmanuel Sanders is huge. I think that the fact that they, Raheem Mostert, their running back, wants a trade. They traded away Matt Breida. And although they seem to be able to mix and match these running backs pretty well, I will take Drew Brees and Sean Payton in their last season over Shanahan and Jimmy G. That's just me, though. But back to the AFC side of things. Look, the Chiefs are returning 21 of 22 starters. You have Chris Jones paid and happy and looking ready to play. Because he was getting ready to hold out. But he's got his pay. He got a big payday, a lot of guaranteed money. He is getting $60 million to his bank account. He's going to play. And he is a huge reason why their defense and why their pass rush is so good. Because he is the second best D tackle in the NFL after Aaron Donald. Right? Aaron Donald's always in a class by himself, but in that next class, if Chris Jones isn't the leader of that next class, he's like number 2 in that next class. They have the 18th hardest schedule, which is still in the bottom half of the schedule of the league. And look, Mahomes, Pro Football Focus has graded him, and I don't have all the numbers in front of me right now, but Patrick Mahomes is not a front runner. Patrick Mahomes is not a guy who, as soon as he gets the lead, he slows down. He is essentially the same quarterback, whether he's playing with a lead or whether he's playing from behind. He's an elite quarterback no matter what. He stays true to his game, and that is very important. We saw him down 24-0 against the Texans, and he embarrassed that team by scoring 40 straight. He absolutely embarrassed that team. And again, like I said, I understand, they have the Super Bowl hangover there, which has always seemed to plague teams, except for like the New England Patriots. The Patriots always seem to be able to kind of figure their way out around it. But Andy Reid is a smart head coach. Patrick Mahomes has showed that he is far, far more mature for his age. He is far beyond his years. He is a old soul, you could say. And he gets it. And he wants to be great. He said, Brady has 6. He wants to try and get 6. He cares about what his legacy is. He doesn't want this to be he wins a Super Bowl early in his career and then he never gets back to one. He wants to be the man. And I think that's huge. So my Super Bowl prediction is going to be the Chiefs going through their 18th ranked schedule. I'm not saying they're going to be undefeated, nor am I saying that the Saints are going to be undefeated with the 24th ranked schedule, but I do believe these teams could easily end up being, they could end up being 13-3, 13-3, 14-2. I could see them being 15-1. I can see these teams being dominant. And the thing with these playoffs coming up as well is you have the extra playoff spot. There's only one bye week. That bye week is going to be so important for a team to get. These teams can't afford to take their foot off the gas in the final week of the season, in their final game. Some of these teams, you will not be able to afford to rest your starters. You gotta play. Because if one team is a game behind you and you somehow lose, that team could steal your bye week. So I think that there's a lot of extra motivation for this team. For the Chiefs, it is simply that this team wants to repeat. This is the cheapest. They're going to have Mahomes. They are returning 99% of their starters, which is just unheard of happening. You got Mahomes under contract. You got all these star players under contract. What's stopping this team from repeating? What is stopping this team? The only thing that can stop them is injury and complacency. And I don't think that complacency will get them, so I think the only thing that can stop them is injury. Obviously, there's some luck that comes into these games and everything, but it's not like the Chiefs are just winning one-score games. They're blowing teams out in the first half. So I think they'll be fine. For the Saints, I look at them and I look at the fact that they still have the majority of their pieces together. Again, their defense, not as good as the Chiefs last season, but I still think pretty good. They've still got some good pieces on it. Drew Brees in his final season, more motivated than ever, especially given his comments regarding the anthem. He has a lot of people looking down on him. A lot of people in New Orleans were looking down on him because of what he said. And while he has apologized on numerous occasions and has, done his best to right his wrong, I do believe that is going to be lingering in the back of his head, and he's going to be sitting there thinking to himself, I need to ball this season. We need to make it to the Super Bowl, and then even if we don't win it, we at least have to make it. If we win it, then that's great. But they got to at least get it. Now, let's just go ahead and say, these two teams meet in the Super Bowl. I will take the Chiefs. In that situation, I will take the Chiefs. I think that the Chiefs have too much frickin' firepower. And I'm not saying that the Saints don't have the firepower. It's not the same as the Chiefs necessarily. But Drew Brees, Sean Payton, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Jared Cook, they do have a better offensive line than the Chiefs, so they could probably protect Brees a bit better than the Chiefs' offensive line could protect Mahomes. I think that the Saints could easily put up points, even though there was a huge discrepancy between the two defenses, because I think the Chiefs finished with the 7th ranked defense and the Saints finished with the 16th ranked defense last year. Defense does fluctuate season to season. It is not always the same. While I'm not saying that the Chiefs are going to go from the 7th to the 24th ranked defense, they could go from like 7th to 10th, 7th to 11th. You know, that wouldn't be too far off of a fall off. Do I think it will happen? Probably not. I'm not saying they're going to be number 1 in the league, but it could fluctuate a bit. I could totally see the Super Bowl being like the Patriots versus the Eagles. It could come down to who makes that critical mistake. Who makes the costly turnover? And what happened in that Patriots game? Tom Brady, chance to go ahead and tie the game, put the game, or take the lead, and he fumbled. And it was recovered by the Eagles, and the Eagles capitalized with points. I could totally see that happening. As I've said, teams like the Bengals, the Giants, Washington, these teams are going to struggle because you've got either these first year or second year quarterbacks with new schemes, new head coaches. They're going to have to listen to new terminology and everything. Short OTAs, it's going to be a struggle. Teams like the Saints, the Niners, the Seahawks, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Texans even, you could say, despite their odd trades. These are the teams that are going to look really good this season. They are going to be the most prepared. I think they're going to come out the gate the fastest. And at the end of the day, I will go ahead and say the Saints and the Chiefs meet in the Super Bowl, and the Chiefs will win it. Anyways, coming up next, we're going to go ahead and get into Dak Prescott and the Cowboys regarding his contract situation. And stay tuned, my final topic of the day. My top 10 quarterbacks that I would take moving forward if I was to start a franchise tomorrow. That coming later.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, I gave my way too early Super Bowl prediction in which I predicted that the Saints would come out of the NFC and the Chiefs would, of course, come out of the AFC. I think the Chiefs' biggest opponent would really be the Ravens, and if you want to say for the Saints who their biggest opponent would be, I believe it would be the Niners. I gave my reasoning as to why it is I believe that both teams would come out, and I gave my prediction as to which team would win the Super Bowl. I didn't plan on doing it, but I decided I had some time in the spirit of things. I go ahead and give it, and I believe that the Saints, I believe that the Chiefs would beat the Saints. It could be a shootout. I believe the Saints would make it very, very competitive, but ultimately the Chiefs, they win their shootouts. To get in a shootout with the Chiefs, they would love it if you could just go ahead and try and engage them in a shootout and just see if you win it. I think the only shootout that the Chiefs have really lost, depending on what your definition of a shootout is, because some people would say that maybe the Patriots Chiefs in the playoffs in the championship game was a shootout. I don't know if I'd call that a shootout necessarily. The Chiefs were down heavy and then they came back. But I would say the Rams Chiefs game. That was like the only shootout that the Chiefs have ever lost. Other than that, they seem to win them all. Anyways, there are multiple important dates in the NFL. Obviously, there's free agency period, the time to tag a player, to cut a player before their deal becomes guaranteed. There's multiple dates that you gotta look at. And one of the most important is the final day to sign a player who you have applied the franchise tag to. Now, the franchise tag was created to give to players who the team is just not quite sure about. Maybe the player has had a off and on kind of start to their career. Maybe they've had a good season here, then a terrible season here, then an average season there, then a good season there, and you're like, I need to see one more year of them. I need to see just one more year, and you give them a good chunk of money. When they sign it, it's fully guaranteed. Especially if they get injured. If you get injured, it's all guaranteed no matter what. The team cannot get out of it. But this deal was signed for, if you have a player under contract for the first 3 years of their deal, they look bad, and then in the last year of their deal, they explode, and they're insane. Maybe they won Defensive Player of the Year, maybe they won just an award in general, and then the team's sitting there and they're like, I don't want to give them a long-term deal. I don't want to do that yet. What if I strap myself? So you give them a franchise tag. It's a 1-year deal, give them a big chunk of money, but most players don't like that, because the thing in the NFL is that players, they want security. That's a big thing you always hear, is they want security. They don't want, yeah, sure, that chunk of money, that's good for that 1 year, but what happens if I get hurt? What happens if I have an Alex Smith-like injury? And all of a sudden, the chances of me playing are between slim and none, and slim is nowhere to be found. Right? So, the last player, well, I guess let's go ahead and get into this. So, some of the notable players who had been franchise tagged. Derrick Henry, Chris Jones, Anthony Harris of the Vikings, Justin Simmons of the Broncos, AJ Green at his age, with the Bengals, and of course the biggest domino of all, Dak Prescott. And why was Dak Prescott such a big deal? Because in recent memory, there's only been one quarterback that has been franchise tagged, and that was Kirk Cousins. His first franchise tag that he did with Washington was for $20 million, and then he played out that season, was basically the same dude. And the deal with Kirk Cousins was they made him the starter in 2015. At the beginning of the season, they kind of started pretty rough. It just kind of looked like an average team. But then in the second half of the season, there was not a better quarterback than Kirk Cousins. You could say when it came to the second half of that season, the only quarterback that I think was really comparable to him was Russell Wilson. Kirk Cousins was outstanding. Got them to the playoffs at 9-7. Didn't necessarily play the greatest in his one playoff game, but after that season, Washington didn't really have a succession plan. They had essentially, they gave up on RG3. It was down to Kirk. They sat there and were like, well, we don't want to give him a long-term deal, so let's go ahead and let's franchise tag him. Gave him the tag. Played out that season, was basically the same dude, led him to the same record, I believe. What was it? I think, yeah. Yeah. Led him to the same record. And when that next season was coming around, they looked at their situation again with Kirk, and they said, I don't think we want to re-sign him yet. We haven't seen enough. And so they went ahead and they gave him a second tag, which was even more money, I think like $27 million or something like that. And, however, in the process of doing so, they ended up losing guys like Deshaun Jackson, they lost Pierre Garçon, and next thing you know, his top receiver was like Ryan Grant, and just, it was a struggle for him. I think they went 8-7-1 that season. It wasn't pretty. And ultimately, after that, they did not franchise tag him again. I believe that they tried to, but they moved on from him. And from that point on, their relationship was never going to be the same. They always say, when you franchise tag a player, especially your quarterback, what you're basically saying is, we don't trust you yet. We've seen you for however long. We know everything about you. You have reached the end of your deal with us. We are not sure you are our guy. And that will never sit well with a player. So when Dak Prescott comes into the league as a raw rookie 4th round pick, he, in Dallas, of all places, He takes over for Tony Romo his rookie year because Romo got hurt in the preseason when he was trying to slide. I think it was Cliff Averill landed on his back and it just kind of looked funny. Romo at that point in time was obviously injury prone, but Dallas had given him a big contract. He was still under that contract. They had planned to go into the season with him. They had this great offensive line. They drafted Ezekiel Elliott. They still had what they thought was a top receiver in Dez Bryant. He gets hurt. Dak comes into the picture. 13-3. Number 1 seed in the NFC. Win your division by a landslide. And, you know, everyone's looking at what the only team that really seemed to have your number, if anything, was the Giants, who I believe that season went 11-5. So maybe they didn't win it by a landslide. But they were dominant throughout the season. They mailed in the last game against the Eagles, so really you could say they could have been 14-2. But he takes over, looks great. Was, I think, voted the 11th best player in the league on the NFL Top 100 list. He gained a lot of people's respect that year. His second year wasn't so great. They went 9-7. Ezekiel Elliott was getting suspended, and there was that looming over the season the whole time. There were some injuries to the offensive line, and Dak just didn't quite look like the same guy. So then the third season comes around. He's back to kind of looking like himself. They went, 10-6? Went to the playoffs. They somehow managed to beat Seattle in a playoff game because Seattle forgot that Russell Wilson is their quarterback and not Blake Bortles. So Dallas ended up winning that game, tragically. Still leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But they won that one. So then it comes down to his fourth year. Now at this point in time, Carson Wentz has already gotten a contract extension. Jared Goff has already gotten a contract extension. These two people from his draft class, who were taken 1 and 2 respectively, as compared to Dak's 4th round self, these two guys went ahead and got contract extensions. And what was it? You know, at that point in time, the Rams had been to a Super Bowl. The Rams, they went to, and Goff didn't play well in it, but Goff had been to the Super Bowl. Carson Wentz was an MVP leading candidate in his second year before he got hurt. The team ended up winning the Super Bowl, so he had himself a ring. But those two franchises showed they trusted these two guys to be their quarterback for the future. Dallas had not. And there's many who would argue that Dak is better than both of them. I will maybe try, I would listen to the argument that he is better than Goff, because I think that Goff is largely a product of Sean McVay. But again, that's fine. That's completely fine. Everyone has a system that they're good at. You take a quarterback and you do what they're the best at. So I would probably listen to that argument. I will not listen to your argument that he's better than Wentz. I just don't believe that. If you saw what Wentz was working with last year, no. What Dak was working with last year as compared to what Wentz was working with, there's just no comparison. At the end of the season, his top receiver was a former quarterback, and they were on to a rookie running back, Miles Sanders, who turned out he could really play. But it was just a mismatch of weapons. And that is a big reason as to why it is that Dallas didn't give Dak a contract extension. Dak last season was terrible against winning teams. Essentially against any team that had a top defense, Dak was terrible against. The only playoff team he beat was the Eagles, and he beat them early in the season. You're going into the last game of the season. All Dallas had to do was win one game, and they would be in. They would have been a lock for the playoffs, and they couldn't win one more game. And then you face the Eagles in the last game of the season. All you have to do is beat them, and you lose miserably. It wasn't like they got blown out or anything, but it just didn't. With all the weapons on that team, you still had such a good offensive line. You still had Amari. You still had Michael Gallup. You still had pieces on that team. You still had Ezekiel Elliott, and you couldn't even beat that Eagles team. That is just shameful. And that is a huge reason as to why this Dallas didn't want to give him a contract extension. Now, I guess the big thing now to think about is just how does this affect their relationship going forward? If you guys remember, if you heard about it at all, I remember reading about this, when Kirk was originally at the table with Washington, he had told that he would give them a discount because that was his team that drafted him. They took him in the 4th round. He was drafted the same year as Russell Wilson, remember that. But they drafted him. He told them, I will give you a discount. But if you put that franchise tag on me, there will be no discount. And they put it on him. And from that point on, their relationship would never ever be the same. Now, by all accounts, Dak and the Cowboys, they were in contract negotiations. Things were looking good. And then those first 3 games of this last season, Dak Prescott looked like the greatest quarterback in NFL history against bad teams. Let's go and be honest. The Dolphins, Washington, and the Giants, nothing to go home about. Nothing to really, write about there. But he beat those teams, put up amazing numbers, was like the number 1 rated quarterback in the league at that point, and then all of a sudden, they went back to the drawing board and their price had increased. And Jerry didn't like that. As the season goes on, obviously they finished, 8-8? And it was just a disaster. It was just an absolute disaster. This is that thing again, when you have a quarterback on a rookie deal, and more importantly, when you have a quarterback on a 4th round rookie deal, when you are paying him peanuts, and he is producing for you the way that he is, and you have 1 playoff win to show for it, that's just shameful. You have 2 playoff appearances in his 4 years. You obviously lose to Green Bay his rookie year, and then, his second year you don't go, his 3rd year you beat Seattle, in what I just think is a fluke of a victory, but you won, and then you lose, the next week. And then, in the 4th year, all you have to do at one point is win 1 more game, and what they do, lose 3 straight? Not even necessarily the great teams. It was just not a good look. So, Dak and the Cowboys didn't get a long-term deal done. And I think that is going to be weighing on Dak all season. And when I say that, I don't mean that in a way of like he's going to be worrying about that. I don't think that. Now, okay, so when Kirk got franchise tagged, there were some players, I believe that even Deshaun Jackson came out and had said something, or at least it had been reported, right? That some players in Washington's locker room thought Kirk was being careful with the ball. That he was being careful to not try and throw too many picks. He wanted his numbers to look good. So he would make a throw that sure gets him some yardage. It adds to his totals, makes his numbers look a bit nicer. But it doesn't help them win. And the reason why was because he didn't want to have a season where he's throwing, let's just say, 30 touchdowns and like 15 picks. He doesn't want that kind of a season. Even though I think that's pretty fine, that's 2-to-1 ratio. But he wanted his numbers to look better than that. I think that could happen to Dak Prescott. Dak, last year was the first season in which he had really any reported injuries. He had some stuff going on with his shoulder, but he played through it. It was even reported that he had, for the first time ever, had missed a practice. Right, this guy is a workhorse. He goes in, he practices hard. He is the consummate professional. He is a leader since the first day that he stepped into the NFL. And that's the thing they always bring up, that not every young player, not every young athlete has the maturity. I think there's a great chance, even with their easy schedule, right? Dak might be standing in that pocket, see he's about to get hit, maybe he gets rid of the ball, maybe he just goes and kind of pulls a Brady and just crumples down to the ground. Maybe he doesn't want to take those hits anymore. And I'm not saying that this is what Dak is feeling, right? I'm just saying these are some thoughts that that I think are reasonable to think could happen. There is a chance that Dak Prescott, he's doing a scramble, right? He's running, sees he's about to get hit, and instead of putting his shoulder into the player to try and get some extra yardage, he just slides. He just goes and steps out of bounds. He doesn't get that first down even if it's a foot in front of him, because he wants to protect himself. Because the last thing that he wants to have happen is he gets some serious injury that puts him out for either, for half the season, the full season, into the off season. That would be the worst case scenario. Knock on wood that doesn't happen to Dak. I think that would be just terrible. Because then you know what's going to happen? Let's just say that Dallas does a respectful thing and offers Dak a contract. There's no way in hell it's going to be anything close to Mahomes. I don't even think there's a chance it would be what Russell got. I don't think it'd be even close to what Deshaun Watson is going to get. They would definitely lowball him. And then he'd probably look at that deal, scoff at it, look elsewhere. But then what other team is going to want to give him a contract? When I think about teams that are going to be looking for a quarterback this next season, I think of the Colts. I think that the Colts could be looking for a guy. I think they've kind of given up on Jacoby Brissett as the possibility of being their long-term starter, which is why they brought in Phillip Rivers. I think that the Patriots could be a team that looks at quite possibly getting another quarterback. If they don't believe in Stidham, and if Cam Newton just isn't quite the guy that they wanted him to be, and so they don't want to move forward with him either, I think there's just a great chance that there's a chance that these teams could be looking for the quarterback. Maybe they would think about offering Dak a contract. Lord, I think if he went with Bill Belichick, he is definitely more of a passer than Cam. Not quite the runner that Cam is, but he is mobile. I think that he and Bill could work great. Just even from the personality standpoint, right? There's a lot of people who are giving Cam Newton a lot of flack, saying they just don't know how his attitude can mix with Bill Belichick and the New England culture. They're just not quite sure. Well, there wouldn't be any attitude concerns with Dak. Dak has never celebrated the way that Cam Newton does. He doesn't dress all flashy like Cam does. And I don't think there's anything wrong with Cam. I love Cam. I think Cam is great. Great as a human being. I think Cam is totally fine, and I think any of that media scrutiny he gets is just ridiculous. And, I think there's some overtones to that we could definitely discuss if we want to get into that conversation. But I think Dallas really missed the boat here. When Carson Wentz and Jared Goff are getting their deals, do people remember that Jared Goff's rookie year, he looked like the equivalent of maybe a high school quarterback? He looked god-awful. I think his Pro Football Focus grade was like a 46, which is terrible. I mean, I remember watching him and thinking, this guy can't play. Now, of course, what we've come to find out is it was just Jeff Fisher, what is probably the worst head football coach of all time, who was really resting on his laurels of getting to one Super Bowl back when he was the head coach of the Titans. But just when you even look at how Dak started his career better than Wentz and Goff. And although Dak never reached the height necessarily that Carson Wentz did in his MVP campaign that just tragically got cut short, although he's never reached that height, he has been a pretty steady player. And there's those who believe that, he got better this last season. Obviously, he had his career high numbers. I think a lot of those numbers were empty. But while I do think Dak has some limitations, as in he needs his team to kind of be right, as soon as he does have some less protection, as soon as, his top running back isn't there anymore, while he has shown that he starts to struggle, that's for any player. If you start losing good players, you start losing your starters that you've worked with forever, and all of a sudden you have an inferior player take over in their position, you're going to struggle a bit. I don't think Dak is some spectacular quarterback, but I do believe he is solid. I do believe he is worth a long-term deal. I don't think he's worth Mahomes money. I don't even think he's worth Russell Wilson money. but I believe he is definitely worth what like Carson Wentz and Jared Goff got. There's no way he's not worth that. That is just nuts. That's ludicrous to think so. So I think that this could really, really play negatively to the Cowboys season. I think they made a mistake by not getting Dak re-signed, but at the same time, I understand they don't want to ruin their salary cap. They don't want to be strapped to a bad contract, and we will just see how this goes ahead. But anyways, moving in, final topic of the day. My top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL that I would take moving forward if I was starting a franchise tomorrow. That up next.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about Dak Prescott and his lack of a deal with the Dallas Cowboys, what I think this means going forward, a little bit of the history of the franchise tag and everything, talking about another prominent quarterback that was once franchise tagged in Kirk Cousins. And yeah, now we are in to our final topic of the day. My top 10 quarterbacks that I would take moving forward if I was starting a franchise tomorrow. Now, I'm going to do this a bit differently than I've done my other top 10s. I usually start at 10, which would be the guy that my least of importance, and then I work my way to 1. I feel like most people can kind of guess at least what my top 3 to 4 guys are. So, just to go ahead and get those out of the way, I'm going to start at number 1 instead. So the guy that I'm going to take first, I'm going to start at number 1 and work my way down to 10. Alright, I'm going to do this a bit differently. So, starting at number 1, Patrick Mahomes, of course. I'm going to take Patrick Mahomes. He was overlooked by everybody. You know, this guy he was looked at as a project coming out of college, played in an air raid offense. People didn't think it would translate well. Yeah, this guy had a big arm. Yeah, sure, he could make some pretty spectacular throws, but the footwork, can he read defenses? Is it really a pro scheme? And then he comes out his first season, throws 5,000 yards, 50 touchdowns, wins the MVP, almost had a perfect season. Not as in undefeated. But the dude, I mean, he would have probably gone and won that Super Bowl. If that Rams team showed up against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, there's no way they would have not won. Right? Now, of course, the teams, they did meet up that season and everything earlier, and the Rams beat them. But you saw what the Rams looked like in the Super Bowl. They were terrible. But Patrick Mahomes, do you guys realize he's been in the league now 3 years? He's only played 2 full seasons. His rookie year, he played 1 game, and he won it. But through basically 2 full seasons of starting, this guy has 9,400 yards, 76 touchdowns to 18 interceptions. He already now has a Super Bowl championship, a Super Bowl MVP, an MVP. He is 28-8 in his career, including the playoffs. And here's what's really crazy about Patrick Mahomes, right? In home games, he's 15-4. It's pretty good, right? But what are his road numbers? He is 13-4. It doesn't matter if he has a lead if he's trailing, if it's the fourth quarter, if he's at home or away. This guy is elite. He is the same quarterback no matter where he is. And that can be very very, very difficult to find out. This kid's only 24. He's now signed to Kansas City for 12 years. He is probably, Aaron Rodgers was the guy who was looked at as being the most talented quarterback in the NFL. This guy's it. This guy right here is the most talented quarterback that I have ever seen. Now, can he keep it up long term like Rodgers could? That has yet to be seen, but I see no reason why he couldn't. And I bring up, his home and away record because my guy at number 2 is 53-17 at home and is 42-30 away. At number 2, I have Russell Wilson. Yes, those are his home and away numbers. He has an overall record of 95, 47, and 1. That is elite. This guy, he's nothing but a winner. Russell Wilson is flat out a winner. And I don't want to hear anyone say that all of his success is because of the Legion of Boom, because they dismantled that thing years ago, and since then their defense has not been nearly as good as the Legion of Boom, and yet they're still winning 10 plus games. This guy has only not won 10 games in one season. And I think it was one of the most fluky seasons I've ever seen. It was a frustrating season throughout. They went 9-7, and that felt like such a disappointment. But again, this guy, even Russell Wilson, as great as he is, 53-17 at home. You take that. But 42-30 away? That's crazy. That is such a drastic change, but that's still pretty damn good. You'd take it. This guy has the highest passing grade over the last 4 seasons when trailing in the fourth quarter and overtime. Let Russ cook. This guy is an elite quarterback no matter where he is. Whether he's trailing, if he has a lead, whatever it is, Russell is money if you let him throw. He's had to deal with bad offensive lines, average receivers at best. Now, Tyler Lockett is great. We're waiting to kind of see what DK Metcalf does turn into after a promising rookie year. He did have Doug Baldwin, undrafted. They found a gem. But he's never had a guy like a Calvin Johnson, a Julio Jones, an AJ Green, a DeAndre Hopkins. They've never, ever given him that, which is why I think it's very interesting that they're now looking at the possibility of signing Antonio Brown. His head coach, Pete Carroll, wants an archaic style offense that is run first and run second and basically run third, fourth, and fifth. And he would rather play like Russell Wilson is Blake Bortles. I am a proponent of let Russ cook. In his career, his Pro Football Focus grade has never dipped below 74. Last year, he led the league with a 91 QBR. At number 3, this might surprise some people, I have Deshaun Watson. Now, the question about Deshaun Watson is his injury-prone factor. But this guy, again, just like Russell Wilson, he's had to deal with bad offensive lines. Realistically, only one receiver in DeAndre Hopkins, and he is now gone, but he still made it work with Will Fuller being in and out of the lineup, and really no elite tight end to speak of, with Kiki QT being in and out of the lineup. They don't necessarily have an elite running back. They've had a good run game, but not necessarily an elite running back. Again, I must emphasize, their offensive line is god-awful. They had to trade the house and the farm and the dog and the kids to get Laramie Tunsil, and they got him re-signed to be the left tackle after they traded away Dwayne Brown to Seattle, interestingly enough. Look, Deshaun Watson in college was a winner with Clemson and was amazing against Nick Saban, who is regarded as possibly the best college football coach of all time and a defensive mastermind. Even in the NFL, Deshaun Watson has been a winner. I will always go back. The moment when I thought Deshaun Watson was going to be special in this league was during his rookie season when he went to go play Seattle in Seattle. Watching that game, I was watching magic. What he did to Seattle's defense, what he, as a raw rookie, what he was doing to that team, he almost beat Seattle, Really, you could say if it wasn't for Bill O'Brien, which by the way, another thing, by any article you see, they basically say Bill O'Brien is the worst head coach in the NFL. He's like the only head coach. I forgot which rankings I was looking at. He's the only head coach that was a minus in the category. He actually costs you points. And I guess if I had to look at an example of that, I would say against Seattle, they had Seattle dead to rights. All you need is 1 first down, and Bill O'Brien decided to run the ball 3 times, and then they punted, and then Seattle went ahead and won the game. I think Deshaun Watson is great. My only concern really with him is his injury prone factor, but I've seen him play in the playoffs. He's great. I've seen what this dude does hurt. He's still great, and he's working with not the best pieces in the world, and yet he still just wins. And I think that's very, very important. He's a leader. He fits today's game. He's mobile. He can throw. Not the most accurate, but he makes do. Still a pretty good thrower. Not the truest of a pocket passer, you'd say. But then again, also pocket passers are very, very much overrated. And with today's game, you need to be able to run, and he fits it. And number 4, I have Lamar Jackson. So I'm sure some people thought that I would have Lamar at number 3, but I don't. And the reason is because I've seen Deshaun go into the playoffs and actually win and play very, very well. I have not seen Lamar Jackson do that. Now, he is Michael Vick 2.0. He is not necessarily the thrower of Michael Vick. Michael Vick had an absolute cannon of an arm and just looked insane. Lamar Jackson does not necessarily have that, but the only thing that necessarily bothers me about Lamar Jackson is really just his playoff performances. That's the only thing I have a complaint about. I'm fine with the fact that he is not the most efficient of passers in the world. I'm fine with that. Even though last season, he was great. I'm fine with the fact that he can't always hit the deep ball the most accurately. I'm okay with that because this guy can make your defense look ridiculous as soon as he takes off. And it's not a thing of he's catching defenses off guard, right? It's not like these defenses don't know that he's gonna run at them. It's not like they don't know he has a chance to do it. It's that they can't freaking stop the kid. Because he's just that good. The Ravens have embraced who he is. Now, he has his 2 playoff games. He has those 2 losses. If you take his total career record and you just exclude his 2 losses in the playoffs, the kid is 19-3 in his career. He's a winner so far. The league has not figured him out, and I don't know if the league can actually figure him out. This guy, he went from a 56, what Pro Football Focus graded him as his rookie year. He went from a 56 and he jumped to 90 in his second year. He works hard. He knows what he has to work on. He gets told that he's not a great passer. He goes and he works on it. He gets told, he admits publicly that he overlooked the Titans and that's not going to happen again. Won the MVP, he's a workhorse, he's mature, and he plays his game. I would most certainly take Lamar Jackson to be my franchise quarterback if I had if I had the chance to, right? If the other 3 guys weren't available, I will most certainly take Lamar Jackson. At number 5, Carson Wentz. Now, just like with Deshaun Watson, there is an injury-prone factor to Carson Wentz. Every single year of his career, he has gotten hurt. His last 3 seasons, once the Eagles season was officially over, he did not end that season healthy. He just didn't. And it's really kind of crazy. But I look back at what he did so 2 things, right? So in his 4 seasons as a starter, I look back at 2 different seasons. Not only does he grade pretty well, obviously his worst grading, I believe, was his rookie year, of course, and those were his worst numbers. But since then, his grades have been much higher. His grades have been he has only improved. But this guy, he's 6'5", 230, 240. He can run. He is a lot like Cam Newton in that factor. It's just a better thrower than Cam Newton. But I look at 2 seasons. I look at what he did in his second year when he was a lock for the MVP until he got hurt. And I look at what he did last season when his best receiver at the end of the year was a former quarterback, and they were on to, their third running back in Miles Sanders, who I think at this point in time is going to be their starter going into this next season. But my only concern with Wentz really is just, can he finish the season healthy? Even last season, he goes into the playoff game against Seattle and he gets a concussion. It seems like there's always something with him. If it's not the knee, it's the back. And if it's not the back, then it's his head. And if it's not that, then it's something else. He had some injuries in college, injuries in the NFL. It is the same thing with Deshaun Watson, but the talent is there. Big, strong, can move. He fits today's game. I do believe he is better than Dak. I believe he has shown he can work with less and do frickin' more than Dak. Just take last season as an example. I will take him at number 5. Now, number 6, I have Dak Prescott. Since Dak entered the league, he's 41-26. He took over, as I stated earlier, in my last segment, he took over for Tony Romo in Dallas. Tony Romo is still to this day beloved in Dallas. They loved Tony Romo, and he took over for him day number 1 and hasn't looked back and has given the Cowboys great success, gone to the playoffs in 2 of his 4 years. The thing is just that in this last season, most notably, he couldn't beat winning players. He couldn't beat winning teams, and that is a problem to me. But I look at everything else with Dak. I look at the fact that this guy, he can run, he can move, he fits today's game, he is a true thrower of the football, he can play in the pocket. Though, like I said, to me, that's not the most important thing. But obviously, you would like your guy to be able to throw from the pocket. But he's a leader, he is extremely mature for his age. A lot of people, they go back to his comments regarding the anthem protests. And how he said, how he basically had his owner's back. You would always love that in a player. And then Pro Football Focus went ahead and graded him as the NFC East's most valuable player over the last 4 years. So since he's entered the league, he is the NFC East's most valuable player. I think he led the league this last season in wins above replacement. Is he worth $45 million? I don't think so. I think there's only one other guy who would be worth that money, and it's Russell Wilson. Next to Patrick Mahomes. But I still think I would still go ahead and take Dak as my 6th dude if I was starting the franchise. He's a winner. I like his intangibles. I do like what I have seen on the field. I think he's limited in some aspects, but he's a solid starter. Now, at number 7, I have Kirk Cousins. What is it? Kirk Cousins is 31 years old. Like, he's still gonna play a while. Right? I mean, it's the same thing with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's only 31 years old. These guys can play another 10 years if they really wanted to. They both seem to take care of themselves, but with Kirk, here's something crazy, right? So people, they give Kirk Cousins a lot of crap. A lot of people talk about how he's a stat padder, that he's not big in his Monday night games. He never seems to win them. He always just performs badly. Here's the thing. Let's just go with some of the stats that you can just go ahead and look up yourself. He was the second highest graded quarterback last season on 3rd and 4th down. Those are known as the money downs. You know who the only guy graded better than him was? Russell Wilson. Did you guys know that he led the league in his average depth of target on touchdowns? I think it was like 19.1 yards. The next closest guy was at 18.2, I believe. Something like that. Kirk is not bad. His grades since he has entered, what I would say about Kirk is he's good, not great. His grades since he's entered the league let's just go with the last 4 years, I guess. 80, 70, 79, 84. And that one season, in which he had a 70 was the season that Washington lost both their top receivers and their top tight end was hurt like the whole year, and it just wasn't a good situation for Kirk to be in. But other than that, he's shown you what he is. He's essentially a B quarterback, a B to B plus quarterback. He is a lot like Dak in that as soon as some of the key pieces do start to get lost, he is a bit more limited and he doesn't always make the best play, that he does struggle. But again, that is with all quarterbacks. I do believe that I would take Dak over Kirk, as I said, but I don't think that their line is too far apart. Look, I watched what Kirk did against Seattle when he was playing with Washington with a migraine, and he beat Seattle when their defense was still good. With a migraine. I watched what he did in the second half of the 2015 season. I watched what he did with the Vikings last year. He beat Drew Brees in the playoff game. Kirk Cousins is not bad. He's a good quarterback. Not great, not elite, he's good. And number 8, I have Baker Mayfield. Now, this might surprise some people, especially based off of what he did last season. The guy he's on his 4th head coach. Alright? He's been surrounded by chaos with the Browns, which is what a lot of people thought would end up happening, that he'd be surrounded by chaos. And that's exactly what has happened to him. But as I've said before, I think he is more like his rookie year than his last year. I hated the turnovers last year. I hated the turnovers he had as a rookie. But do people remember, as soon as Hugh Jackson and, who was it, Todd Haley, who was their offensive coordinator to start the year? Whoever the Steelers' former offensive coordinator was, when Baker first came into the league. As soon as he lost those guys, and Freddie Kitchens took over calling plays, and Greg Williams took over as the head coach, Baker's turnovers almost altogether but stopped. He wasn't throwing a pick every single game anymore. He was throwing multiple touchdown games, big passing games. He looked great. Pro Football Focus had graded him as a top 10 quarterback. But then once the chaos starts happening, once all of a sudden the offensive line is in shambles and the head coach position isn't good and the play calling isn't good, it all fell apart. I like Baker Mayfield. I can't wait to see what he does this season. I think he is a lot more like what he was his first year in the NFL, more like what he was in college. I think last year will be his outlier year. Obviously, I could be wrong as soon as this season starts. I could be very wrong, but given right now, that's what I'll say. This is gonna piss a lot of people off. At number 9, I have Marcus Mariota. I will go to my grave saying Marcus Mariota can be a starting quarterback in the NFL if someone would just let him play his game. Just let Marcus Mariota play his game. He went to Tennessee and they tried to turn him into Peyton Manning. They tried to turn him into a pass-first, pocket-passing quarterback, and that's never what he's been. This guy dominated at Oregon. He was 36-5. His passing numbers were actually really good in college, but at the same time, you know what else was really good? His running numbers. You know what numbers of his look terrible in the NFL? His running numbers. And because of that, his passing numbers look bad. I think he could be in an offense a lot like Lamar Jackson. Now, does he have the same agility as Lamar? Is he going to make people miss the way Lamar does? Hell no. But I think back to his rookie year, and I think back to when he faced Jacksonville towards the end of the season, and he had what? An 87-yard run against that team? He made them look ridiculous. You need to let this kid run. In 2 of his worst seasons, people would say, with the Titans, which was his third and his 4th year with the Titans, those were his highest graded seasons too, where he was close to 80s. I think he had like a 90, like a 76 and maybe a 79, which are pretty good grades. But then keep in mind, he had his offensive system was so bad. I just think they did him such a disservice. They never used him properly. I would be more than happy to take Marcus Mariota on my team and use him properly. Marcus, I hear you. I saw you beat the Chiefs in that playoff game. I saw you do it. You came back. I actually think that through his first 3 years, I think Marcus Mariota had like the highest comeback rate. Or he was among the leaders in comeback rates. He won a lot of the games in which he trailed in the fourth quarter. So, look, I believe in Marcus Mariota. I want to see what happens with him in the Raiders because I think if they give him a chance and John Gruden actually uses him properly, I think he could be their guy. And at number 10, I have Kyler Murray. When I watch Kyler Murray, he reminds me a lot of Russell Wilson. He knows how to slide. Just like with Russell, when they run, they don't necessarily make anybody miss. But straight line speed, getting out of bounds, making sure that you don't get hit, he's a lot like Russell. I think that Kyler Murray throws a beautiful ball. I thought that kind of shocked me, actually, but hey, he has a baseball background. You know, if there's anything he knows how to do, it's throw. And I think he demonstrated that very well. He fits today's game greatly because, again, the days of the Peyton Manning and Tom Brady's really are over. You cannot afford to be in the NFL anymore and not have mobility. Excuse me. This kid has mobility. Throwing to 86-year-old Larry Fitzgerald, he completed 64% of his passes, 3,700 passing yards, 20 touchdowns to 12 picks. He had 544 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. I think altogether he had 14 total turnovers, so 24 to 14. You'd want the turnovers to be a bit lower, but those are pretty good numbers for a rookie. We all saw what the Cardinals looked like with Rosen under the helm. They completely gutted their coaching staff. They brought Kyler in. They built the system around him and what he does. They traded for DeAndre Hopkins. Kenyon Drake is there. They went ahead and jettisoned David Johnson. I'm excited to see what Kyler does going into the future, but I think he fits today's game. I think that he will be a success in this league. While his grade wasn't necessarily that great, at the same time, the Cardinals have a lot of problems. He runs himself into a lot of sacks, just like Deshaun. That is another thing to mark against Deshaun. They both run themselves into a lot of pressure and sacks. That can be fixed. But then at the same time, that's just a part of being a running quarterback. Sometimes you run a bit closer to a defender, but it's just because it's your play style. But that is my top 10. Did it a bit differently, started from 1, worked my way to 10, so to read it back again to you guys, starting from 1 up to 10, Mahomes, Wilson, Watson, Lamar, Wentz, Dak, Kirk, Mayfield, Mariota, and Kyler Murray. I already know there's somebody sitting there scolding me because I said Mariota, but again, I believe in Marcus Mariota because I think that he has never ever gotten a fair shot, and I would just love to see a team finally. I'll tell you what, if one team can use Mariota the way that he actually legitimately plays, if one team gives him a shot and he doesn't succeed and they let him run his offense, I will go ahead and concede I was wrong. Let's just go with that. But a team needs to actually use him properly first. Good show. I liked my list. I'm sure there's some people who are probably wondering why I didn't have, again, like, I'm not going to include any of the rookies in because I haven't seen them play yet. I'm not going to include any of the older guys like a Matt Ryan, these guys who don't have at least 10 years left in them. I don't think any of these guys, Matt Ryan, Rivers, Breeze, Rodgers, I don't think any of those guys, Brady, I don't think they have 10 years left. I just don't. Anyways, thank you for listening to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.